Hi, I'm Michael Green with EG4 Electronics, and today we're unboxing our 24,000 BTU 2-ton mini-split AC unit. This highly efficient 24-SEER unit will operate either on 240 volt AC or up to 380 volt DC. Now let's see what's in the box. And here we have our indoor unit. Packaged with the indoor unit, you have your user manual, installation manual, remote and remote clip, penetration mounting hardware, batteries for your remote, PV connectors, MC4 style, and packing putty for the penetration in the wall. Also included is your drain hose and your communication wire from your outdoor to indoor unit. Now we're going to unbox the outdoor portion of the unit. Included in this box is your low pressure and high pressure copper lines and the outdoor unit itself.
Hi, my name is Randy with EG4 Electronics, and I'll be running you through a 2-ton mini-split install. One of the first steps we'll be doing is running the wires through the backside of the unit into the head unit in order to connect them. You'll have to remove the wire clamp and the faceplate obviously first before you can have access to them. Make sure you have the appropriate amount of tension on the wires. You don't want it too loose or too tight. You'll be replacing the faceplate once you've put the wires in. You'll see the sleeves are numbered here on these collars pre-attached to the wires. Simple, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 1 to 1. And this last one here will be your ground, which is the green and yellow wire. Next thing you want to do in order to make sure that they're located in the correct tube and area is to remove the condensation line from this side and move it back over to where you see the plug here on the other side. You'll need a pair of needle nose pliers or something for the clamp on the inside. The tube slips off. You'll remove the plug from the previous side. Be careful not to tear it. It is tight. Pull slowly and gently until the plug comes out. Replace the plug in the other side. Otherwise, you'll have water drain out the back of your unit in the open plug. Make sure the plug seats all the way in past all the ribs. Next, you'll reattach the condensation lines to the interior new tubing located right next to the line set. Once you've done that, make sure your clamp is secured with a pair of needle nose over the small tab they have located next to the port. It can be a bit of a tight spot, so go ahead and make sure you give yourself plenty of room to work. Careful always when moving the copper tubing installed on the head unit. You don't want to bend, crimp, or crack any parts of the copper. Once you're secured, you are ready to bind all things together and pass them through the hole in the wall. Next, you'll want to bind all the things going through the exit hole and entry hole in your wall together so that they slip through smoothly. I like to use painter's tape because it leaves very little residue, removes easily, and has a tendency to slide through a lot easier. Make sure you bind them as close to each other as possible to make as small of a profile as possible. Also making sure to cover things like any open line sets or any condensation tubes at the top, just so that we make sure we don't get any debris inside of any tubes during the install. Again, all of this will be easily removed once we're through the wall. It is a safety precaution to make sure that we can get everything through nice and simple. Once you've situated all of the parts you need to on the head unit, you're gonna wanna go ahead and get your hole drilled after you've mounted your bracket. You'll wanna pay attention to where the bottom of the bracket is. You don't ever want to exceed the hole lower than that, and you don't want to exceed the outside. The easiest thing to do is to measure from the side and the bottom of the bracket to get your center. We find that it's approximately 4 inches by 2 to 1.5 inches. Once you've had and marked your spot, go ahead and drill through one side of your wall, should it be wider than you can get through, so that you can mark the other side. Once you've made sure there are no studs, lines, or anything else inside, go ahead and get your new tool to go ahead and go through and touch the wall on the other side so we know where to cut from the back side. One of the things you'll want to remember while leading everything through the holes is that your hole needs to be put in a downward angle to ensure proper condensation drainage. Lead the wire through first to make things easier on yourself. It might help to have a second pair of hands during this part. Being careful with the copper. Lead everything through. Once you've made sure that you've passed through the port correctly, you're gonna wanna go in from top to bottom and make sure you click and that the unit is secure and does not move from the wall. A light tug helps ensure that you've made your connections correctly. When addressing the electrical, you're gonna wanna cut to size. Start by removing the exterior bracket and 4 Phillips screws. You'll also want to remove one of the holes for putting in a wire clamp. You'll have to supply these yourself. We suggest that all wires are wire clamped, preferably with waterproof seals, in order to make sure that no electrical components get wet. Once you've removed all 4 Phillips, front face should come off like so. It's a little snug, but it does come off by hand. You'll see very similar connections with very similar numbers to what we did inside. 1, 2, and 3. There's also a clamp in here that you'll want to use for secondary clamping on the interior of the unit. Make sure you remove the pre-installed stoppers for the wire clamps beforehand, because this is where you'll be running your wire through. When starting to reinstall the wires, run your wires through your clamp into the box, making sure to give yourself enough room to slide them through easily. This is where you'll be pulling the wire in to size. There's plenty of wire they give you for most applications. In the event that you should need to extend the wires, we recommend any external connections being made waterproof. The next step we'll be doing is releasing the nitrogen charge. They have an inert gas in the head unit to keep it pressurized and free of debris. You'll want to make sure you're wearing safety glasses and gloves when removing these. In order to make sure it doesn't pop off and shoot at you, open it up a little bit, let the air leak out. You should hear it slowly start evaporating. And that's that. Remove both caps, and then you're on to attaching your line sets. The next step is to hand tighten. Do not torque down, hand tighten your flare nuts and your line set connections to your indoor unit. You'll want to use nylon glue in order to make sure that the threads are sealed accordingly. It is a non-contaminant for refrigerant systems. You'll want to relax the tubing out gently, making sure not to kink it, and make sure it leads in a downward slope to the unit. Making sure that you'll be cutting your copper, flaring it, putting the flare nut on before you cut it, and reattaching it with nylon glue on the other fittings as well. After you've cut and run your line set, and after you've flared, make sure you put your flare nut on before you flare the line set. You're going to remove these black caps located at the top of the ports and hand tighten on your line set. Be sure to use your nylon glue on your threads to ensure proper sealant. Again, you don't want to get this inside of the ports, but if it does, it's not that big of a deal. It is a non-contaminant for refrigerant systems. Then you simply slide on the nut and proceed to hand tighten it until you can't hand tighten it anymore. And then we will be torquing the nuts down. And that is installing the line sets. The next step is going to be torquing them down. The torque specs are very specific because it helps crush the fitting and copper, press it in together to create a proper fit. Make sure you don't have any leakage. The small line, 1/4 inch, you're going to want to take anywhere between 10 to 14 foot-pounds. Here we're using a digital. Almost. One more little turn. There it is, right there. The next one will be for the 1/2 inch line. It will be 40 foot-pounds. Right there, and that's that. You'll repeat this process for the interior lines and the connections to the head unit, and then you'll be ready to nitrogen press. Before we begin our next step, we'll have to remove this nut here on the back. We've already pre-taken it off with an adjustable wrench. You might need that to remove it. You want to make sure you have your adapter for working on mini splits. Most gauges do not come in the correct size to plug up to a mini split. That's why we have these 5/16 adapters. Take them from 1/4 to 5/16. You attach the hose to the bottom of the 5/16 adapter. Make sure it's nice and tight. We don't want any leakage. And you'll be ready to start your pressure test. One of the first steps in beginning the nitrogen pressure test is to open the valve. Make sure that your secondary regulator is completely unscrewed and not activated. You'll open the tank. Make sure you have the appropriate amount of pressure to do the test. Once you've confirmed that your tank has pressure, you'll bring up the PSI on the gauge to the point, making sure that all of your gauge valves are closed. You'll be bringing up, spinning clockwise, this up to the factory recommended PSI, which is 500 PSI. Continue to spin until you get the desired amount. Then you'll be ready to make the adjustments on the gauges. Once you've confirmed that your regulator is at the right pressure, you'll go ahead and slowly open your low side until the pressure equalizes what you need it to be as per the factory standards. We're sitting right there around 550, which isn't going to hurt anything. The higher the pressure, the easier it is to detect a leak. 500 is the recommended manual. In the manual for the recommendations. Now that we've let the unit sit for about an hour, we've noticed the gauges haven't moved anything below what we set them at beforehand. So now we're going to go ahead and leak test. A little bubble and trouble here. Any kind of non-corrosive bubbling solution will work. It's very important it's non-corrosive, otherwise it'll eat through the copper. Make sure to get plenty on there, just in case we want to see any bubbles coming from the front of the threads, from the back of the threads. All good there. Doesn't look like we have any leaks. We'll do the same thing up here for these fittings. No bubbles visible, so the system's ready to evacuate the nitrogen. Now we'll be purging the nitrogen from the system to begin our vacuum afterwards. We want to slowly release it here at the regulator. And we can watch the pressure drop on both the regulator and the gauges. Once it's done and you've reached the low pressure, make sure you close your low side line and get ready to do the vacuum test. Now we'll be connecting the vacuum pump through the gauges to the low side line to vacuum out any moisture, contaminants, or excess air in the system that'll affect it later on in its performance. Go ahead and turn on your vacuum pump. and make sure both of your valves are open for your vacuum and your low side line, and that it's pulling a vacuum. You can see it's pulling a vacuum because it's gone below 0. And we're gonna let this run for about 15 minutes, which allows us to get to 500 microns. When shutting off the vacuum pump before vacuum testing, you'll wanna make sure that you close your valves first and then shut off the vacuum pump. Then you'll be waiting 15 minutes, again, to make sure that the pressure does not go back up. After you've confirmed that the vacuum will hold, you'll remove these nuts, break them loose with an adjustable wrench, remove these nuts here, and be able to introduce Freon into the system. You'll use the number 5 Allen key, twisting counterclockwise. You'll hear the hissing of the Freon traveling through the system. You want to make sure you open these all the way up, but don't force them past where they're supposed to go. We like to open the high side first and then the low side. After you've accomplished this, you replace the nuts on the outside to make sure no debris or anything gets in. You'll remove your gauges and you're ready to have a licensed electrician connect from the disconnect back up to the unit. If you are a licensed electrician, you'll find the wiring diagram in the manual. One of the last things we address in the install is the open hole and the lines coming out of it. We are going to be sealing our hole not with the escutcheon provided, but with instant foam, because we're using an industrial application metal wall and the escutcheon won't sit on it flat. Your condensation line is the same one we moved on the head unit, and we want to make sure we attach the supplied hose onto it, push it past both ribs to make sure that the seal is accounted for. Lead your line down and have it run somewhere where the condensation won't affect any electrical or structural parts. Second thing to note, your outdoor unit will condense water while in heat mode. So it's important to understand that there is a hole directly in the bottom that fits this port. Should that condensation drip be something that you're worried about touching electrical or any structural areas, install this according to local code, plumb out and away from it.